Hello everyone, this is Mirko Guerrini and I welcome you to the Jazz Transcription Clinic, a monthly interviews podcast where we talk with accomplished jazz doctors about their lives, career and their personal secrets on the art of transcribing. If you want to improve at jazz, stay tuned and follow the Jazz Transcription Clinic on the socials for more content. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is being recorded. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Hello everyone and welcome to the next episode of the Jazz Transcription Clinic. This time the clinic has moved to North America and we have a special guest doctor, the one and only Roberto Occhipinti from Toronto, Canada. Welcome, Roberto. Roberto is a good friend of mine and a colleague, and I played a few times with Roberto, and I always loved sharing the stage with him, and especially the fact that his music knowledge is immense. I can only say that he has played a lot of classical music. He's a classical music producer and a jazz musician, an improviser, a soul, electric bass player, a jazz producer. So he has very, very wide and broad skills into the music. And today, I forgot to say that Roberto is also Sicilian, which gives him like few extra points. And I don't remember when I met you. I was trying to think.
I met you at Atina Jazz.
Atina Jazz. Okay,
you were
that's
playing
right.
with Giorgio Ferrara, and I was there with Mario Romano playing. We played, and I met you there, and we talked. I'm trying to think of why, because I invited you to come to Canada. Canada.
Yeah.
And we did that workshop in Banff.
I think you're right. You invited me because I came to Canada with Giorgio, but that time I don't think we played together. But then we played. You invited me to do a workshop and a masterclass at the Banff Center for Performing Arts on the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, it was interesting because Banff was known for the jazz program that they had there. But we did the residency unbeknownst to us that week. It was all devoted to Stockhausen. And
I remember that.
So for the longest time, I played a lot of contemporary music. So I was familiar with all the techniques, but it certainly wasn't what we signed up to do in the first place. But it worked out well. We did some of your music there.
We did some of my music, some of your music, and there were a bunch of very interesting characters, I remember, and we played their music too. I remember I played a wonderful arrangement of yours of Naima for like string quintet.
For strings, and yeah.
And
I recorded that on one of my albums. I ended up recording it there. We played your piece, April 1. April
16, 1889. Yeah.
There was the extra bar at the end of the phrases all the time that messed me up. You know? So if I transcribed more often, maybe I wouldn't get messed up on those kinds of things.
That's right. And you can just hear how smart Roberto is in introducing the topic, of course, of the podcast, which is transcription. And without any further ado, I will shoot the first question, Roberto. If you transcribe, why do you transcribe?
Well, I have to say this, that I do transcriptions, but mostly for financial gain.
That's new to the podcast.
Because most of the time when I'm in a situation where it's more a question of I'm incredibly lazy. So when if I have something to if I can find some other copy of it, if I can do anything to avoid transcribing, I will do that. Unfortunately, lots of times, there's a lot of music that I'm dealing with, I actually have to transcribe it anyway. So I'm a reluctant transcriber, but it's obviously a fantastic exercise to engage in.
So all our listeners that are still doubtful about transcribing now can do it, if not for the art, for the money.
Well, there's that. You laugh, but there are people. I've had friends who have made a living transcribing music for people.
No, I'm laughing because I'm on the same boat. That sometimes it's a great skill to have, because I remember in the past, for example, I collaborated with a popular TV show, and they had to produce a number of arrangements every week. And of course, you are told, we want to do this arrangement, and you don't have time to look for a chart or for a score. So all you have to do is to just transcribe it yourself.
Yeah,
and sometimes you have to, show very good transcribing skills, because maybe you have to transcribe a rock piece, and you have to understand well, what the bass is doing, what the drums is doing, which has always been a very difficult thing to do for me, to transcribe like a drums part. It's not easy.
What's interesting about transcribing, and this has happened to me a couple of times, because I'm playing with Cuban musicians, for instance, and I'll transcribe things because in jazz, we do everything in cut time. So you have something like metronome marking, eighth note equals 180, which is ridiculous. In music theory, if you have an eighth note at 180, you should be in 2/4 or cut time. But psychologically, we see the eighth notes. So I would transcribe something for my colleagues, and the way I heard it, and the difference between what I heard and what I put on the piece of paper was not the way that they looked at the same piece of paper. We were both hearing the music the same way. If everybody played by ear, it would be no problem. But the idea is that when you notate, depending on your discipline, on where you're coming from, how you notate something is it also gives you an insight as to how the other person is hearing the same music that you are, because of the way they've put it on paper. For instance, if you play Brazilian music, a jazz musician always writes it in 4/4 cut time. But Brazilians write everything in 2/4 with 16th notes. Yeah. And conceptually, the idea of the forquet, that's what they call it, the fork, right? Da, 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 makes perfect sense when it's in 2/4, because you get that sense of it. Yeah. In Cuban music, for instance, it's with clave, they write it in 4/4. They don't write it in, because it's a binary thing, so I'm used to having a 2-bar phrase. But a lot of the Cubans write it in 4/4 in 16th notes. So conceptually, to get your head around it, and I think that's something about transcribing that you end up learning. It's like learning another language. You see how someone else, the concept of what they're saying, and when it's put on paper, makes you think another way with your brain when you hear it.
This is so interesting because you raised a real issue here, that sometimes there is a double filter. Because the first filter is how you listen to music, what you hear when you listen to music, and the second filter is your theory knowledge helping you to put it on a piece of paper. And if some of the listeners have already tried to transcribe a jazz solo, they will surely found themselves in a position where you need to understand whether those 5 notes are actually a quintuplet, or if those 5 notes are going across the bar line, or all those matters. And you raise the rhythmical point of view, how you write that specific rhythm. And we know that, for example, in jazz, we need to approximate a lot.
Because the idea of the eighth notes, so you're writing eighth notes, and they could be a dotted eighth with a 16th, but then it sounds like Dvorak humoresque, that. So the idea of how it goes. I don't speak German. I think you do, but in German they make a distinction between music. Music is what you hear. Noten is what's on the page. It's like there's no confusion between the two. Sometimes we say he reads music. No, he reads notes. We play music.
Yes.
You know. So when you play notes, you're approximating, because a lot of the nuance does not get onto the page.
I always
when I do transcribe, I at least try to get the right notes and the right rhythm. And if we get into articulations, I don't know how deep you get into your transcriptions, but articulations, dynamics, things like that, that's all part of it too.
Yes, absolutely. And to continue with what you just said, I used to say to my students all the time, we don't read music, because when you say the word music implies sound.
Exactly.
And when you read, not necessarily you have sound. You can read in your head, for example. So I say, if we accept the statement, I read music, I want to accept the statement, I play the newspaper.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
It's the same paradox. So that's right. And when you transcribe, what do you expect to bring home? What do you take home from a transcription, apart from the fact that maybe, it is necessary for your work or for your commission?
Well, there's that. I mean, I'll transcribe things that are of interest to me. Maybe not the whole thing. I hear things that say, "Oh, that's pretty cool there," and I'm always looking for some good stuff to steal. And we take things all the time. It's like what was it Clark Terry said? Imitate, assimilate, innovate. Those are that's the Prieto. Yeah, the three, and I counted like an Italian too, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
With your first finger, right?
Yeah. I went like that. I saw that movie. so the thing is that I'll take figures that I like and either play them by ear, and that's transcribing too if you're playing it by ear. But I'll write them down because I have a memory like a sieve. So I will put down certain things. I remember doing, some commercial thing it was a jazz blues, and I had to play just a little bit of fills and solos, and someone said to me, "Wow, that sounded fantastic." And I said, "It should be. It's Ray Brown. That's where I stole it from." So that's the other part of it, is that by transcribing, you put a lot of that music in your pocket, and you can take it out every once in a while if you need to spend that money.
Yeah, and what is more, you learn the language. You learn to speak that language.
Very much so.
Right.
Very much so.
I was impressed, Roberto. Let me tell a very quick story that I always remember of you. You really impressed me one day. We were in Rochester after we played the festival.
With Jovino.
Yeah, I think we were waiting for the shuttle to bring us to the airport or something like that. We were in front of the hotel. And a guy, a big black guy, dressed like a rapper, was passing by. And he was wearing those big headphones. And all I could hear was this kind of, sound that you hear coming from some headphones. And you stopped him and you said, "Oh, you are listening to," and you mentioned the artist.
Oh, okay.
And he said, "Oh, yeah, right. Do you know him?" And you said, "Yeah." And you had a conversation on there. And I thought, and I still don't know after those years, I still don't know how you did it.
You know that there used to be a television show called "I Can Name That Song in One Note." Name that tune. It was called Name That Tune. I don't know if they had that in Italy or in Australia. So they would go, you'd go like 10, you start off with 10. I said, I can name that song in 8 seconds, and it's 6. And then finally, you got to name that song. So I'll name that song in 1 second. Now, how can you name a song in 1 second? Because the note, the timbre of the song, the timbre. So if I say I can name that song in one, and it's James Brown, and you go, huh? I say, oh, that's James Brown. You win, right? Because your ears is attached not only to the tonal information and rhythmic information, but the timbral information. The timbre of what you hear is part of it too. And I was used to, I think whoever that guy was, I don't know what was listening. It was some hip hop thing, right? It was, it was because you were doing techno there. I don't listen to techno, but it was some hip hop stuff.
So you used to listen to music through someone else's headphones.
No, it's because you can hear kind of the groove and the timbre, and I think it was. I think actually, what was it? It might have been Biggie Small or something like that.
This is what I wanted you to say. This is where I want you to go. When we listen to a piece of music has a color that is given by a sum of factors. So the groove, the timbre, as you said, the pace, and the combination of sounds, and all together, it becomes very distinctive and unique. So probably you knew the tune and your brain just click.
Yeah, well, that's right. It'll attach to the rhythm and it'll attach to the timbre of the thing. I don't even remember. I don't remember that. I have a picture of us standing in front of the hotel though, so that's something. But I mean, no, it was us waiting for. I was thinking, man, I gotta do some running here. I was looking at this pancione that I've got, but no, it's but actually, going to your transcriptions and stuff. Sometimes because of the timbral information, it's difficult to hear some of the lines for that reason. Because you're hearing stuff and you're saying, "Wow, is it a B flat?" But then if you're analyzing the chords that the piano player is playing, and maybe for that one note, the guy, played something really crazy. There's a lot of stuff where you're hearing Charlie Parker playing a major seventh on a blues, right? Then you're aware of it, and then your brain thinks that, well, does he know what he's doing? I said, well, it's Charlie Parker. He knows what he's doing, or maybe he doesn't. But he played the major seventh on a dominant seventh chord. And that itself is an interesting thing, that if you're transcribing something, that's the anomaly, and you have to deal with the anomaly too. But you're hearing what someone actually played against your expectation of what theoretically should be there, and you get to learn something. So that's why I always play major sevenths on blues now, but not on purpose.
And get told off. Yeah. I think you have already sort of answered the next question, which is how do you choose the solos or the things you are going to transcribe? Do you want to add something else?
Well, I'm a bass player, and obviously, when I started, I feel you copy and transpose the other bass players that you influence to. But if you want to be a soloist, the last person you want to transcribe is a bass player. I'm living proof. It's terrible. So if you're going to transcribe, I think it's very wise to transcribe somebody that you really, some other instrument that you really like, and it can be daunting. But I've been transcribing a little bit of Dexter Gordon, and Dexter Gordon is very difficult to transcribe because he's so far back in the beat. His time feel is so laid back that putting that on paper somehow doesn't do justice to what he's actually playing. You could put maybe arrows to say, play this so far back on the beat that you're actually in the next bar. Yeah. But that kind of thing that, I'm a fool to want you, but where he goes like goes up there to it's a minor sixth chord all the time. He's doing these arpeggios. Yeah. So it's interesting to hear that to write that stuff out. But like I said, I don't do a ton of transcriptions that way. I mean, I do like I'll pick out things that I like and do that and grab it that way.
Right. And what methodology you apply to transcribe? Do you use any software like to slow it down or?
You know what? I have started to do that a little bit. Before it was just play the thing over and over again. That's Dave Liebman's way of doing it. Is you play it over and over again. You learn it by ear and then write it down at the end, and then play what you wrote and see if it's the same as what you remember by
Yeah,
ear.
even because, when you want to learn a transcription, of course you will play the same line on the CD player or, on YouTube like 50 times. And by that time, you will have memorized the sound and you don't really need it to write it down. You write it down because you want to analyze it.
Yeah,
But there's no need, or you want to share it with someone else. But actually, for your own, benefits, if you are not interested in the theory behind that line, it's not necessary
yeah.
to
Well,
write it down.
so what I'll do is when I'm transcribing something, first things first is to figure out the form.
Yeah,
Listen to it in terms of the form of the song or the piece that you're doing. You find out where there's it's AABA or whatever extra. There's a tag at the end, something like. So I lay out the grid that way, put in the and mark out all the bars, and then when you start transcribing, if all of a sudden you've got too many notes for the bar, then you did something wrong, or then you have to go back to it and work it that way, and then kind of after a while get rid of your mistakes on the stuff and to tidy it up as much as possible.
yeah,
Again, and then I'll write out the chord symbols, of course, so that on top of what I'm transcribing, to know that, for instance, Charlie Parker's playing a major seventh on a dominant seventh chord. I know that the piano's playing the dominant seventh, and I can sort of hear what the bass is playing there. So we know what the root motion is. And then you can see where the anomalies are, and you say, really, it is a major seventh. It's not just you messing up. It is a major seventh chord. Major seventh, he's playing on the dominant seventh. I keep using that analogy because it's a good one.
I remember when you mentioned transcribing bass is a little bit of a drag. I remember years ago I had a large ensemble, 13 pieces band, and I wanted to do some of the George Russell's music.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you barely find anything. And I remember I started with that pieces that opens his album Stratus Funk and his
Okay,
title
yeah.
track,
Yeah.
Stratus Funk,
Stratus Funk. Oh,
which
wow.
is a blues,
Yeah.
but it took me ages to understand, what was the real form. And then I said, okay, I need to transcribe the bass because the piece starts with a bass line.
Yes, it's Richard Davis, I think, on that.
Yeah,
Right?
that start with like a fermata on the first note, like dun don don ding don gong 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 gong. And then I counted and I saw that after 12 and a half bars, he start repeating the same notes.
12 and a half bars.
12 and a half. So that was, I think, designed in a way that it goes upside down, like it goes if it shifts by half a bar, the bass. But I
You,
could
you didn't think it was just a pickup into the downbeat of a 12-bar blues?
no, because he does exactly the same two notes at the start of the next chorus.
Ah,
And he repeats 12 and a half
maybe
bars.
maybe he messed up.
Maybe he messed up, but it works so well. And I couldn't recreate that sound with my band, with telling the bass player, play random, random walking bass. To recreate that sound, I had to transcribe and write
Yeah.
down all the notes, all the sequence, and then I got that sound. Right.
Um,
So it was
I
quite
had
interesting.
Actually, I had a similar experience. I started transcribing a Charlie Hayden bass line with trio record he did with Kenny Barron. And I gave up after one chorus because I love Charlie Hayden, but the lines were, and I guess that's the beauty of transcribing the stuff, is like you're hearing this stuff and you said, really? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, he's very convincing. I'm still not convinced, but he's very convincing. So, I mean, that's the thing too. But I mean, at a certain point, you can only get so much on paper anyway. All that information won't come across well enough unless you've got people who know what that music is all about. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the part of transcriptions that's a limitation, but we have to do it. We have to do it.
So, Roberto, how do you practice what you transcribe?
How do I practice it?
You simply play it, and then once you got it, you move.
Like I say, most of the time when I'm transcribing stuff, I'm doing it for a specific work situation. So I'm transcribing stuff to bring to the gig, or I'll say, or like I'll do some commercial thing or something like that, where we have to do it, and I've written out everything, and the guys have to play it. So it makes things easier. For instance, we just did this little movie that you played on, and they asked me to transcribe music that's, vado a spasso. I had to transcribe all that. I mean, it was easy enough to do, but it was for a specific purpose. So most of the time when I transcribe, I do it for the specific purpose of getting paid. So that's a terrible thing to do. But like I told you, I'm incredibly lazy and not very ambitious. So I sell out very quickly for something like that.
I wouldn't say it's a terrible thing to do. It's actually a great skill to have, because
it is.
If you don't have it, you have to pay someone to do that job for you.
So here's something. I've done a lot of stuff. I'm used to playing the opera, playing the symphony, contemporary music. Played a bunch of jazz with a lot of very well-known people. But one little side thing I did. I toured. There's a hip hop group called Gorillaz, which is very famous, and I ended up subbing for the bass player who was arrested at the airport in Toronto, and I ended up going on tour with them. I did the North American tour, and I went to Africa and played in Europe with them. Where this ties in with transcriptions is that the keyboard player was really a saxophone player, and he used to play in a group called Jamiroquai.
Oh.
Yeah. And he graduated from the Guildhall School of Music as a saxophone player, and he did his thesis on the music of Joe Henderson. So he's obviously a well-schooled musician who's playing keyboards with Gorillaz. He's still with them. Mike Smith, his name is. Not Mike Smith, the alto player, but another guy. He's an alto player anyway. But what he did was, because he said, oh yeah, can you come down? And on an hour's notice, I went down to rehearse with them. In the meantime, he transcribed all the bass lines for all these tunes so I showed up. This guy's with his ears, has transcribed the bass lines, puts the music in front of me, and I start playing. They're blown away. They said, wow, it's amazing. You're playing all the same. Yeah, and I said, I'm thinking, I've played Stockhausen and all this stuff. The easiest gig in my whole life was this one that paid me the most money that did, and they were like, if I tell people that I played with, recorded with Berio or something like that, I said, huh? But I said, yeah, I toured with Gorillaz. Like this, it's crazy. And it's like these little fragments because only by the grace of God that the keyboard player could transcribe all those bass lines for me to play, and I could sight read them on the spot. Yeah. So I mean, that's a skill set I'm sure he never thought he'd have to use on a gig like that, but it came in pretty handy.
Yeah, I think most of the times we don't realize that how important is to be able to get, the notes out of it. I I worked with some people that were simply stuck by the fact that they didn't have a chart for
Yeah,
this, you know.
that's the flip side of it. It's like the joke. How do you get the guitar player to turn down?
Yeah,
Take the
yeah,
chart away.
but then you think, well, I don't have a chart, but I have a recording, so you can manage your way, to get
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I say,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
I can't do it. I need a chart. And you think, well, if you need a chart, I start questioning, your ability to listen to what we play when we play together,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Because
the
usually the two things are going together. If you are not able to hear things that are on an audio track, then the question is, what do you hear when you play?
well, that's I mean that's the thing about that's why when I see tablature on a guitar, to me, I'm thinking, well, that's I mean, music itself is an inexact science. The written part that's inexact. Tablature is like it's like more like I don't know an instruction manual how to turn the car on or something like that. Doesn't tell you how to drive the car. It just tells you where you're supposed to put your fingers. Now the flip side of it is whoever's doing tablature is listening and is just saying, oh, that's how he played it. So he is playing by ear. But I think there's kind of a falseness to that kind of way of thinking about music. The thing about when you transcribe and you're using your ear and hearing it is that it's a twofold thing. You're understanding the music that you're hearing, but you have not just a roadmap, but an analysis that you can look at and say, this is this and this is this, and have a sense of what's going on there that maybe you don't hear at first, but then you say, oh, wow, right. You're looking at this thing here and you say, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense now because you've taken the time to slow down. The other thing is music goes by pretty fast and a lot of things go by in our lives. If we can slow things down, I mean, I think it might be a great analogy for living well is maybe we should just transcribe our lives, transcribe what people are saying around us or transcribe what we see.
Arguments with your wife.
Yeah, well, that happens once in a while. But that one's a standard now, so it doesn't. It's not a new tune.
Exactly. But also, going back to what we said a little bit before, that you apply your theory knowledge to what you hear, that to me is the right process to approach music, because too many times we approach music from the theory. So our first step is the theory and then we go to make some music, but we don't understand the sound anymore. But if we start with the sound and then we apply the theory to that sound, we have the whole package. I give you an example. There is a popular piece that is played by many students here. In Australia, we have a system of exams for like high school students, a sort of grades that you go on, and you have some specific pieces that you can choose from, your repertoire for the exam. And there is one piece which is a very, very nice piece composed by an Australian musician. And first time I hear that piece, it's a sort of Latin groove in C minor. And there is a specific part where the saxophone is C minor for the saxophone, so E flat minor for the piano, for concert. And there is a specific part where the alto saxophone is playing like a D major arpeggio, going to the 5, G dominant, going to C minor. And to me, that was a sound itself. It's a perfect cadence with a 2 chord as a dominant, secondary dominant to the dominant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the student came in and tried to play it, and he said, "Oh, that G flat annoys me so much." I said, "What G flat?" And I look at the chart, and they wrote it G flat D A, in C minor. And that's wrong. I said, "That's wrong. That's not a G flat. That is the sound of an F sharp."
An F sharp. Because
and he said, "Isn't it the same note?" Yes, on the paper. But the sound, if you put it in the context of C minor, there's no way that's a G flat. Unless it's like in the blues scale. Then I can consider. But in that case is 3-1-5-1. That's an arpeggio of a secondary dominant.
Yeah.
And you have to write it, if you want to write it, as an F sharp. Otherwise, my head goes nuts. Because, it clashes. It's like, no, that's not a G flat. Come on.
Well,
and it's easier. It's easier. I say, think D major. D major, try it. Which you can play. If you think D major, try it. That makes a lot more sense.
Well, there's a little bugaboo now for me is when people are doing copying charts or transcribing things where they play it on a keyboard into something like Sibelius or Finale.
Yeah.
Finale doesn't know it's an F sharp or a G flat or anything like that. I just did a recording with a bunch of Cubans, and the piece was in G minor. It was in G minor, but the first chord was a B minor major 7 chord.
Yeah.
But my part was a B natural, G flat, C flat. I was like, it's a B, But again, that's laziness because that's not taking the time of saying it's what the chord is
or ignorance.
What the notes are. No, this one I know the guy. He's actually a very, very good musician. But again, relying on the keyboard because he's a keyboard player, he could just play it in, and he is playing it by ear. So he type it and then presenting the chart to somebody after you transcribe. Yeah. But if you're going to transcribe, at least transcribe the right notes.
This goes to the wonderful quote of the great Bruno Tommaso. Have you ever met Bruno?
No, but I know his work, of course.
Yeah, he's one of the best composers and arrangers we have in Italy. And I used to study arranging and played in his big band when I was a student. And so he once told me, you have to make the parts very, very clear and easy to play. So you have to put yourself in the mind of the player. And there is a saying in Italian which you will understand, which goes, "Patti chiari, amicizia lunga." And he used to say to me, remember, "Parti chiare, amicizia lunga," which means clear paths, long friendship.
Yeah, I just had it's funny that you say this because with this same young fellow that I just worked with, and we did a great recording with Pascal Labarbera, very fine tenor player, played Elvin Jones. He was on it too. I said to him, and they were scuffling because of the way it was written. I said, when you have somebody of these and if the parts are not clear, it's not their fault. It's your fault.
Yes.
I said, when I prepare my charts, because I do a bunch of arranging stuff, mostly I'm never successful, but I try. I assume that 15 minutes before the gig, the saxophone player got in a car accident and somebody in the audience had his saxophone. So how would I make it so easy for that person to be able to sit in so that nobody would know there was a sub that night? I go through all the charts. I lay them out. As you see the phrases, I'll do 4 bars on a staff if it's a 4-bar phrase, 5 bars if it's an extra one. I work out all those things. I tell people, paper's cheap. 2 pages. You don't have to try and do everything on one. You get 2 pages or 3 pages on a music stand. Rehearsal letters are cheap. You write in A, B, C. So that in the heat of battle, the guy says, you don't say the bridge. You say letter C. Bam. The guy will know. We can. It's all logistics about making things as easy as possible.
But again, I think you're wise enough because you apply the theory after you got the sound. So you have a sound in mind and you know exactly what is the best way to comply with the theory in order that when I read it, I can play. Another thing that annoys me the most is, and this happens a lot to pianists, for example, they prepare a part on Sibelius, and instead of transposing everything like a tone up, for example, for tenor sax, and leaving or with no key signature, they use the automatic transposition tool in Sibelius,
D major, it's a
and
D major.
everything has two sharps. So I have this part in E flat minor for me, and I have two sharps in the key signature. How bad is that?
No,
I can't play. My mind goes crazy because what I can hear is E flat minor, and then there's no trace of F sharp or C sharp in it. So that's
exactly.
That's
but
crazy.
I'm going to go back to your point about theory following practice. Theory has always followed practice. Because people didn't work out. So I think I'll work out this whole thing about voice leading, about parallel fifths, about hidden octaves, things like that. They didn't work that out before they wrote the music.
Exactly.
They wrote the music, and then someone said, you know what? Let's try it without the parallel fifths here. Which is fine for like Bach and Brahms and, but what are you're going to tell Duke Ellington no more parallel fifths? Come on, so the theory follows the practice.
Yeah.
The practice was we went with what sounded good. And people are going, they do when you get into that kind of thing. But is this not going off topic about your transcriptions?
No. It's not going, because it's important that, when we transcribe, we also take a few minutes to understand the theory behind it. That's part of the process, and it's a big part of what you can gain from a transcription. So do it.
I had
absolutely.
A friend of mine, his wife was a concert pianist with perfect pitch. She was amazing because she would listen to, I played her some Keith Jarrett, and she was there and says, oh, that's interesting. And, she would be like a typewriter, write it down. And she could play it, she could hear it, but she didn't know what it was. By ear, you couldn't say, well, he's playing You and the Night and the Music. Right. And it's like what the form. She wasn't. They weren't. She had the ability to transcribe everything she heard, but she had no concept of what it meant and why it meant. And that's the other part of. If you're going to get into transcribing, that's the major part of that's actually basically the whole point of transcribing is to figure out what someone else has done, why they did it, and why does that appeal to you? Why does that work?
Yeah. Do you have any strategy, Roberto, to incorporate what you transcribe into your playing?
In my playing, like I say, I try not to. When I play bass, when I'm playing, I try to sound like, Ray Brown or Paul Chambers or Scott LaFaro, someone like, depending on the context. The bad news is that every time I try, I still end up sounding like me. And so after a while, I just accept that I have to sound like me. I'm
not sure it's a bad news.
Well, what they say, he was modest about his abilities, and justifiably so. But I will say that I will try to, from other instruments, other solo instruments, to try and sound like them. I sound like I say, like a baritone. So I like, hearing Harry Carney kind of things. I'm doing a bunch of Ellington stuff, but like I say, I really like Dexter Gordon's phrasing, and I try to think that way. Try to copy that phrasing, not specifically the notes, but there are things that he does, So I will do that. But what I will do more for transcribing is in my arrangements and stuff. So, for instance, I did an arrangement of Penelope. It's a Wayne Shorter tune.
Yeah.
And I wrote it for my ensemble. I have a 9-piece ensemble. And he played such a sparse solo on the thing, but I really liked it. So what I did was I transcribed his solo, harmonized his solo for the background, and then had the saxophone player play on top of these figures that Wayne Shorter played. So that was, because I was taken with that one solo. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to transcribe it and then use that as material for some other musical stuff. Whether it's successful is another story.
But once you transcribed it, it's in your pockets, so you can use it.
So that's what I did, and then again for harmonizing and things like to just think about. It's interesting to transcribe stuff like that, and again to see that person's strategy as to how to solve this problem. Whether you end up using the same strategy or not, but it gives you a point of view that say, I think I'm going to get through this thing this way. I'm going to, you can see when you see all the transcriptions of Charlie Parker, you'll always see with the broken phrase and then he answers himself, that kind of thing. Now, whether you play every Charlie Parker, play Charlie Parker solos note for note is one thing, but you will pick up a lot of his intention as to how he approaches the chord, the chord structures.
Yeah, because what is clear even in this podcast, what is coming out is that there is so much more behind the note than what you see on the paper. What you see on the paper is just a duration and a pitch. Yeah. But then there is a lot of other stuff which gives the meaning to that note. And by transcribing, of course, the fact that you get the duration and the pitch is just your first step to start your work. On the
it's the gateway drug. It's the gateway drug into getting the notes in the pitch.
I like it.
I'm happy to get the notes in the pitch if I can. It's a really good start if you can get those two things. And but the interesting thing about this is a philosophical thing about playing music. When people say, you read music and you said, I don't play by ear. So I have to read music. Well, so no, everybody plays by ear. Because whether you're, you're not going to tell me that Yo-Yo Ma, when he's playing a Bach cello suite, it sounds like he's improvising, but it's all written out. But he's not playing he is playing by ear, because otherwise, how would he know he's playing the right notes? Yeah, how would you know that? But how do you know that if you stick your finger somewhere, unless you're a bass player, to know that's a D? You have to hear it to say it's a D. It's not just like it's not just like a position, on a piano, like an automaton, a player piano or something like that. You actually have to hear your instrument. You have to hear whether you're in tune. You have to hear what kind of sound you're making, and again, it all comes back to hearing. Even if you're reading somebody else's music, and in effect, whenever we're playing classical music, we're playing somebody else's transcription, because they're transcribing what's in their brain.
That's true. That's true as well. And we are to the last question, Roberto. Happy. Do you have which is the dumbest question out of all the questions, do you have a favorite transcriptions that you made that you are particularly attached to, or that you remember?
You know what? One of the first ones I ever did, and it's one of the ones I always tell people to I work with classical musicians that want to be involved with, as I call it, vernacular music, whatever that might be. But I always tell them kind of blue, and to go with So What.
Miles solo.
Just for the idea. I mean, it's a great one to start off transcribing with, because it's all D minor there, or D minor, whatever we want to call it, and it's the logic of it is so strong that you pick up on it quickly, and it's becomes a revelation for a lot of people that have never done something like that before. And so I guess that's the one that sticks with me, just because it's one of the first ones I ever did, and it was also one that I used to get people into it, and it's not as daunting as you might think it is. Yeah.
No, we have it at Monash University here in Melbourne. We have it in the first year program. All the students have to transcribe the Miles Davis solo and play from memory. That's like, a good way to enter. I have another one that I used to recommend to my student as a good starting point, because it's not too difficult, and it is the tenor solo on Count Basie's Planky.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It's just 2 choruses, but it's a great saxophone solo, and you get, what you need to play the blues. You get those little inflections, a couple of, nice cherry notes, like alterations moving from the 1 chord to the 4, and the attitude of playing on that track is so great and it's just 2 choruses, so it's doable, and the student think, okay, I can do it. Because too many times the students are put down by the fact that it is a difficult job, it's a difficult task, to transcribe a solo note by note, and sometimes to get 2 bars you spend like 4 hours.
Well, the thing is, now with all the technology, you're asking earlier on. I mean, sometimes what I'll do is when I have to do a transcription, I put it into Logic.
Yeah.
And put the audio in there, and then loop those 2 bars, loop those 2 bars, loop those 2 bars, and then go on to the next, loop that, and work my way through it that way there. I haven't really gotten into the ones where you slow down the pitch yet. I mean, I go with.
You can do it with Logic. Pretty.
Yeah, I know. I never got around to it. There's a saxophone player in Canada I told you about, Remy Bolduc, and he has a fantastic system for transcribing, because he does his.
One of our next guests on the show.
I think what he does, and he has a video about how he does it. I think he does it in Pro Tools, and he has Sibelius linked to it. So he has both programs up at the same time. He can slow it down, and then he's putting it into Sibelius as it's going by in real time. But he's so good at it now that he's pretty fast at just writing it out.
Yeah.
It's a skill set. It's a skill set that, that I wish I was better at.
But you said something before, Roberto, that when we play classical music, we are playing someone else's transcriptions, which is true. But I would say then when we play jazz, we play a transcription again, because we are hearing something in our heads, and then we are able to, play it on the bass or on the saxophone, and that is also, a kind of very quick and fast transcription process.
Definitely. I mean, there is, obviously on any instrument, if you have some sort of technical facility, you can just go through muscle memory and just play your licks, whatever they are. The challenge is to not play your licks. The challenge is to hear in real time what you're going to play, what your process is, and react. It's not like you're having an out-of-body experience, because your brain is super engaged, one would hope, is super engaged in the process, and that if you can get in the zone where everything is happening so quickly but all of it's happening at the same time and in real time, well, that's what we all aspire to as improvising musicians. It is very difficult to always maintain that level, but we must always try to be at that point.
All right, Roberto, thanks so much for being part of my podcast and being the guest doctor of this show. Is there a website that you would like to recommend to our listeners where they can listen to your music and eventually buy your music?
Well, you can actually, most of my stuff is on iTunes and Spotify. I have a record label. My record label is Modica Music.
Okay.
And I have a website, modicamusic.com. My parents' hometown in Sicily is Modica. Or robertooccipinti.com. I have to say it in English, robertooccipinti.com. It's very, very easy. You can do a Google. I have a brother who's quite well known too. He's a guitar player, and a cousin, very fine guitar players, both my cousin and my brother.
I will definitely put all those informations in the description.
Thank you so much.
Please follow Roberto also on the socials. He's quite active, and if you can, support his work by buying his music. Is always first quality. Every time Roberto is sending me something, I know that is something of the highest quality. What else?
I'm waiting to come to Australia to come and play with you again.
Now probably is not the best moment.
No, I know.
To do that, but we need to fix.
Are you going to tell your listeners about our mix-up about the time zone? Because I said I would talk to Sunday night, which is tomorrow in Canada.
Yeah, because when I call Europe, it's usually the same day. So at my place, it's like afternoon or late afternoon, and for example, in Italy, is morning or lunchtime. So I gave for granted that it was the same thing, but you actually have to add some other like 6-7 hours to that, and I was like, oh my god, I messed it up.
No, yeah. That's fine. I was watching TV tonight. It's COVID. I'm staying home, but doing my thing. But Mirko, if we don't meet in Canada and we don't meet in Australia, ci incontriamo in Italia.
Yes, and we have one cannoli in Modica.
Solo uno?
One every 10 minutes.
Okay, brother. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. And thanks to all our listeners. Stay tuned for our next shows, and go on the website of the podcast. You can watch the recording of the podcast on YouTube as well. Every month there will be a new episode, and leave a comment if you want to leave a feedback, or if you want to leave a feedback on how to improve this podcast, will be highly appreciated. Thanks so much to Roberto. Thanks to all of you, and listen and hear you next time. Bye.